Good morning. Did everyone have a good sleep? I went to bed at 8 p.m. and was up by 6, so it was like a long time. It was like a lot of sleep. So I'd like to say that it fixed me and made me better, but it just made me want to sleep more. I woke up thinking about, remember when you were little and you'd wake up and you didn't have anything to do, and you would just kind of lay there and just feel like it would last forever, like the morning was never going to stop. It was like that, and I was like, oh, this is so good. I haven't felt this way in decades. And then I got an email. And I was like, oh, that's right. You have to be a cyborg today. So this is really confusing. I'm going to be honest with you, because this was originally one session, but when I told the organizers it was a 4-hour workshop, they made it 2 sessions, and they didn't do that until like a week ago. So what you're going to get is the best we can do in the first half and the best we can do in the second half, and we'll try to custom tailor it to where you're at and what you need and what you want to talk about. But if you want the entire thing together, just tweet me or give me a business card and I'll send you all the presentation. You guys are in the Chronocyborgology workshop, part 1. Part 2 will be right after this session. So are you in the right place? Okay. Was anybody, you never know. And also, I'm not offended if you want to look at your phone, if you want to be on your laptop, if you want to walk out. I'm okay with that. I really am. It's the last day for me, and you can do whatever you need to do. I did want to pass around the survey machine with a battery plugged into it and just say, rate me now, so I don't have to worry about it, but I'll save that. Learning to manipulate temporal cognition is kind of what we're going to be doing today. And it's kind of a mouthful, learning to manipulate temporal cognition. So I thought I'd start by just asking you guys about time. So I started my very first workshop at this event talking about magic. And I asked the room to define how they defined the word magic. Can a couple of you share with me how you define time? It goes really slow when you're bored. Very good, I would agree. And when you're in pain. I swear it's so bad when you're in pain. The dentist takes forever. Anyone else have an idea about time? I know you guys think about it. It goes really fast when you're immersed and you're happy. It goes really fast when you're immersed and you're happy. That's a really good one. Most of it doesn't exist, right? That's hot. It's the thing that keeps everything from happening at once. I mean, it's the truth. It's the truth. It's the opposite of oil, right? It makes things sticky. You know, I have a really interesting relationship with time. Were you guys in the keynote yesterday where I talked about my life, any of you? So since the majority of you are, I won't go through this, but I've had 10 years kind of looking at myself through this lens of data. And the movement that I have been pegged to, besides biohacking, which I don't think I'm a biohacker, has been the quantified self. And for me, sometime around 2013, 2014, the idea of the quantified self really became sickening because I became obsessed with measuring myself to a certain level of perfection. And I started working on the qualitative self. This particular session, and this used to be a very short keynote, but then it just got to be too heavy to talk about, really came from my research and my learnings about my own journey. So the first time I shared anything about what I'd done was in 2013. I talked a little bit about my healthcare between 2008 and 2011, because I had 2 years of reflections and information and data to learn about what I learned about it. By 2014, I'd done my first workshop on mindful tech, which you saw kind of yesterday in the keynote. That was just like a really high-level version of some mindful things I do. After that, I did my first chronobiology workshop. That was a 2-hour workshop. And that was basically, once I combined the body and the mind, I realized that what we were hacking was time. because time hacking is really what you all are trying to do. You're trying to save it, or waste it, or create it, or whatever you're trying to do, you're trying to time hack. Which really led me to this, the workshop I developed in Germany 2 years ago on love and intimacy, so using your devices for love. I was sharing something this morning with this young lady in front, that my husband and I, we actually trade phones on the weekends. So I use his phone, he uses mine. And it creates this level of empathy for our lives, because it's like, oh my gosh, you've got a crazy life. And it's like, oh my gosh, you have one too. And then last year, I developed a workshop on the occult and paganism, which I gave for the first time 3 days ago. So you can see, it might seem odd to you how I'm combining technology into all these things, but the idea was, it was very simple for me to start to see that if you could master the body, you could start to work with the mind. If you could work with the mind and the body, you could work with time. If you could work with time, you could find out what love is. If you find out what love is, you could put a spell on someone. All right? It's that simple, right? Everything you do with tech is to do magic. That's why this exists today. But I want to talk specifically about time, because I think there's a lot going on with time. So let's do this. There is a lot of news right now about time. The New York Times, no pun intended, just had a big article on, oh, sorry, I forgot to turn that off. You guys are probably wondering what that is, right? Does anyone know what that is? So yeah, so it makes me not look at my screen when I'm working. I'll turn it off. Well, I'll just let it go so you can see what happens. So basically, it's kind of like the stand for your watch, except it makes sure it pops up on your screen so you don't stare at your screen. It comes every 20 minutes, and it reminds you of how blind you'll be if you don't do it. Oh, sorry, I didn't move it. Is it moving? Not really. Let me go back to work. You guys are like, oh, he is weird. He is super weird. Prescriptions in the future look like applications. Let's go ahead and pause this until tomorrow. All right, so there's a lot going on with time. The New York Times had this article about the human brain as a time traveler. I've been doing some research with the University of Pittsburgh's Chronobiology lab for a better part of a year on chronobiology. What's the award that they give? The Nobel Peace Prize for health this year went to a chronobiology. Anybody familiar with the concept of chronobiology? What it means? So it's a real science. It's how the brain and body reacts to internal programming, internal clocks. We'll get more on it in a second. But what I wanted to do was just kind of get you guys caught up to speed on how this became such a passion of mine about time and time hacking. It really came when I started noticing about 3 years ago there were young people who wanted to have gray hair. And it sounds weird, but it's one of these things where you're starting to see what I describe in a lot of my tweets and blogs and on news shows as time collapse. I believe time is collapsing. I believe what we're witnessing in the world right now is time is peeling off of physical things. It's peeling off of psychological things. There's all sorts of cues that are happening that show that time is no longer relevant. And that might sound weird, but it'll start to make a little bit more sense in a moment. Some other things is some very famous people, whether it be Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk or even Tim Cook, if you look at pictures of them from 5-10 years ago, they look horrible and they look amazing today. So the young people are looking old and the old people are looking young, right? It's this really bizarre thing, and you'll start to see, especially if you search social media for people talking about time, that people are having all sorts of temporal abnormalities. There's been a high influx, at least in North America, on reboots from old shows from the 90s that are coming back. Are you noticing that in Sweden, where they're taking old concepts and recycling them? There was a great article, actually, it's in my email signature line from the Times. It was called The Golden Age of Bailing. And the whole concept is everyone's always skipping things that they promised to do. They skip appointments at the last minute. It's just become too convenient to get out of things. And then finally, my favorite thing was from the Post just last week. This guy no longer wants to be, not only have a gender, but he doesn't want to have an age. And so I think it's very clear that what we're witnessing is a shift in our relationship with time. Why we don't talk about it more, I think, is a whole other probably topic. Has anybody heard of this? Come on, put your hands up, you conspiracy theorist. I know there's some Redditors in here. Who are my Redditors? Look at you people. Okay, I'm not going to say 4chan. So the Mandela effect is this idea, and it's a conspiracy theory, it's not science, so don't freak out, don't call me on the carpet. But it's this idea that we're living in an alternate timeline right now. And how these people prove that it's true is there are certain things that you remember one way, but that are actually another. For instance, a lot of college students and young people remember the Bernstein Bears, Fruit Loops, Kit Kat, and Looney Tunes. That's literally how they remember them. But if you actually look at the packaging or the logos, this is what they are today. So it's the Bernstein Bears, Kit Kat without a dash, and Looney Tunes logo is different, right? So there's a large, and by the way, do not Google this stuff. You'll spend hours lost in a hole. You'll end up on medicine. It'll make you crazy. But there's a lot of things happening where people swear things were one way. Like I grew up, and I'll be honest with you, I remember the Monopoly man with a monocle. I remember it like it was yesterday, right? I remember Curious George with the tail, Oscar Mayer ball franks, and Pokemon. But no, that's not, this is who they are. This is who they've always been. They've never been different. Never. In Star Wars, Darth Vader never says, Luke, I am your father. Never. Never happened. Nope. Got your attention? So, I'm just saying, prepare to trip balls. So again, I think there's a lot of psychological reasons, both profound, founded in science and other ways, that kind of show that there is something weird going on with time right now. Some people believe in simulation theory, and that's this idea that technology has evolved to such a point where we're actually in a simulation. Some people believe that, what's the lab in France? CERN? Some people believe that CERN actually found a God particle sometime in 2012, and we actually went in two timelines. There's all sorts of theories, both kind of, well, that makes sense, and that really doesn't make sense. For me, I think it's all a technology thing we're witnessing. One of my favorite ways to kind of explain the effects of technology on our mind is the idea of looking at isochronic maps. So this is a map from 2014 on how far, oh, that's really hard to see, I'm sorry about that. But this was how far it took to get from the middle of Europe to other places. So it could take anywhere up to like 60 days to get out to other places. But by 2016, you could get most places in just a day or two. And it comes from this idea that I think our perception of time is collapsing because time perception is controlled, is controlled by access to a controlled table or system. So the thing is, if something doesn't change, your idea of how fast time is moving is changed. So the easiest way to explain this is, if you look at the onslaught of news, the first time you can find people talking about kind of shifts in their temporality, or they felt like life was speeding up, was right about the same time we got kind of access to mass news. Early in the 1900s, people became travelers. They started seeing more world travel, transatlantic travel, flight, etc. That also, you'll see high spikes in people saying that time is changing, or they feel this perception of time is changing, or life seemed to be speeding up. By the time you got to the 50s, you kind of got the mass market commercialization of kind of the commodification of the default lifestyle. Two wives and a kid. One wife, two kids. That's a whole nother talk. I do that talk too, by the way. You can't get to be 50 and gay and not have done everything. Climate change, again, I think this is really interesting, because if you just look at climate change for the fact that people under 20, for a large extent, don't know seasons. Like they don't have a winter, spring, summer, fall, just because it's all kind of becoming this homogenized global nightmare. Technology and media, the first time in the late 90s when I saw a TV channel playing a video with a chyron, with a scrolling feed, right? It's just like, oh, there's a lot going on. Also, you get up to the social media and everyone being connected. I remember in 2007 or 2008, I was visiting Australia and I woke up and I looked at Twitter and I realized I could see people waking up in different parts of the world. And now there's all sorts of neat trends that show you, like, not only does the sun go around the earth, but so does the words good morning, people saying it to each other. And it's kind of profound to think we're only 8 years into this. And then I think there's actually what's happening and why time is collapsing, and that's this idea that the interface has become so constrained that a majority of the planet, and when I say a majority, that's 5 billion people, look at the exact same screen. Now, even though some of us have Android and some of us have iPhone, if most of the planet is doing the same gestures and the same icons for most of their day, then time's going to look very similar. I don't think time is speeding up. I think we are becoming the same. Does that make sense? So time isn't moving any faster. Our view of each other and the world is becoming homogenized. And as that flattens out, we start to enter this type of time collapse. Now, it doesn't explain the Bernstein Bears, I'll give you that. But that's for another time. All right, chronobiology. So the human organism is dependent on light, right? Everything from jet lag to seasonal affective disorder to all sorts of problems come from your ability to have or get or receive light. If we look at this from a program, and again, this is just anything you do during the day. Your body knows to respond when it's working out by the time, go to sleep, etc. But if we look at this programmatically, and through cybernetics, what we'll see is there's actual stack that there are artificial influences on that actually tell systems when to do things. We call them cron jobs, right? So there's a certain amount of chronology. When you merge those two things together and you get an entire population of people who are both working biologically and systematically, you start to see in this entire evolving population. So you'll have a bunch of people evolving similar thought processes, a bunch of physical processes. It's quite profound when you actually start to say, well, what happens when you merge computers and people? And you don't need to be a robot to merge the two. You just need to influence them enough so that they start to think alike, right? And I think this is really important for us to talk about. So cyborgs and time. As I mentioned, there's a whole bunch of things your body does externally and internally. So internally, this really comes from things I've done around the School of Chronobiology in Pittsburgh. Your body, your intestines, your heart, your liver functions, they all know to reduce and release certain functions at certain times of day. It's just natural. It's the way our bodies kind of keep track of what they need to be doing. But this really doesn't explain the brain. So what I wanted to do was try to walk you through how the brain in this works and then put a technological component on it. So in the lower part of the brain, the reptile brain, we have the things that are controlled, like the cerebellum and brainstem. Things from your heart rate, temperature, breathing are all controlled through that lower part of your brain. As we move up the brainstem, the mammalian part, or the limbic system, controls the not so vital functions, speech, vision, hearing. You can get by with not being able to talk or hear, but if your heart stops, it kind of kills the rest of the system, right? And then finally, the neocortex, or the primate part of your brain, takes care of personality, memory, reason. Again, you can get by without a memory, but it's still nice to have these things. So this is basic human operating system 101, just the way it is. Now, if we take that same type of idea stack or system stack and we apply it to timing, then we start to see that that bottom part of your brain, the reptilian part, actually handles the timing of kidney function. The middle part of your brain actually handles the inputs, the sleep-wake cycles, cognitive performance. When people want to go into flow, this is the part they're hacking. And then finally, the frontal part handles, okay, I'm hungry now, I need to go out and do this. So all of this information is feeding in and then going back to those systems we just looked at and telling them what to do. It's a very, very simple feedback loop that happens. The problem is these analog systems are starting to give rise to kind of global systems. So as the species became more intertwined, our global brainstem was aware of timing on a very long scale. Seasons, environments, plants, harvest, right? Again, very simple, long stuff our ancestors understood. But as we evolved as a species, we became more tied into systems that were a little bit not so long-standing in time, governments, culture, infrastructure, and then finally we come up to modernity sometime in the 1800s where we got into things like commerce and arts. Again, the same system follows. If we start to wrap that and we say, well, what would happen if we replaced those analog systems and gave a brain, especially through the prefrontal cortex, an always-on, wearable, tappable, haptic, connected, mobile lifestyle? Would you start to actually influence someone to evolve faster cognitively? Could you destroy their sense of time? I believe you can. I believe that's what's happening. I believe that being able to call for an Uber now and having food delivered 6 months from now and all the other things we do can actually start to change your perception of time. So this whole workshop is really about how we are, or this whole session is really about how we are systematically changing our brain, and then some things we can do with technology to restore that functionality and or make it better or worse or faster or slower, things like that. Question, do you guys have any parts of your life where you feel that your time, it can be biological time, it can be work time, I don't really care, has changed? Free time. You don't have any free time, right? Or you do? Okay. You feel you have less time. Have you checked to see if it's actually true? I wouldn't mean to put you on the spot. I mean, I have lots of feelings, but I'm like, okay, but I don't know if they're true. My feelings are like a terrible lover. They lie all the time, and they're always cheating. I would say on average, no. On average, no. What about, come on, who's got time problems? Can't get things done. What's the biggest holdup to getting things done? Disruptions, that's a good one. Anything? Don't have any time? I love looking at my calendar. Sometimes I just stare at it for hours like a golden child waiting to give me a kiss. I just think there is so much beauty in a calendar, and especially when it's empty. It's just like, oh, that feels so good. And then I do this other thing with calendars that I love, like when I need to make appointments, people will say, well, how about, next Wednesday the 18th at 3 p.m. I'm like, what day of the week is that? It's Tuesday. No, not Tuesday. Why not? I don't know, just not Tuesday. Right? Because we have these like buffers in our mind for like things we'll do and we won't do. Like we somehow can mentally travel to the future, see that day and go, nope, that's not going to be a good day, right? Which is this really weird thing that I wish we would just acknowledge, that we're all constantly mentally time traveling. But yeah, calendars are, I think for a lot of people, they're controlling their lives, which is why I think in my keynote I said I stopped valuing my schedule and started scheduling my values. Now I literally say, these are the things that are going to happen this week. And I don't say this time, I say this week, and then I just make them happen. You're a time optimist. Oh, what do you mean by that? Mm. He can do anything, but he can't do everything. Very, very profound. Behind? Social media is eating your time. Now, that might be okay. I mean, if that's how you're getting your interactions. I think we pick on social media a lot. But like some people, that's how they get their interactions, so it's okay. Anyone else? I mean, there's a lot to think about with time. All the way and back? Yeah, yeah. So she's saying like the fear of missing out, you always feel like you're missing something. I know in my book I actually talk about FAUX, F-A-U-X, instead of FOMO, but like the false fear of missing out. And like I literally now try to miss out on things just because I find if I don't talk to someone and have them tell me something I don't know, I find them to be boring. You people know what I'm talking about, right? I mean, I've had friends actually say to me, like, I'll catch up with a friend I haven't talked to in like a few months or something, and I'll be like, oh my gosh, last month I was doing this. They go, I know, I saw on Facebook. You want me to stop talking then? I mean, did you read that issue? At what point did I become media to binge? Right? I mean, what we talk about is like the most important thing you can do in relationships. If you ever stop someone or you're stopped by someone and they say, I saw that on your feed, don't be their friend, right? If don't binge watch people. It's in my book 100%, like we have to stop. So act surprised if you have to lie and go, I didn't know that, except they put like 100 posts online, right, every day. These people like, did you hear I'm dying? Yeah, last week and today, and here's my fundraiser because I'm still dying. I wish you would just die, right? But that was awkward, sorry. But it's one of these things where I just think we need to talk about how we're treating each other. But this whole, and even the kind of rise online of these kind of words, like have you seen this TLDR, too long, don't read? IYCMI, in case you missed it, right? We literally have acronyms. In America, it's so bad, every day is a food day. It's Taco Tuesday, right? It's Fresh Food Friday. It's like everything has become temporally labeled because you don't know what day it is. McDonald's in America now serves breakfast all day. It's called breakfast, right? It's just completely weird how much this is happening to people. Anyone else having some time things they want to admit or talk about or deal with? All right, moving on. So if we look a little bit at cyborgs, I talked about this yesterday, and we go back and look at, and I didn't talk about this guy yesterday, and we talk about some of these early cyborgs and talk about the things they did to help them deal with time compression. That was one of the concepts that this talk is about. You have to go back and first look at Stephen Mann. Stephen Mann is a scientist, researcher, student. This is him in 1981. I think he was an MIT student. He's probably the father of cyborgism. But in 1981, he was rigged with software. And one of the things he did with all the software and hardware was influence the world around him. So he would augment his reality, allow text and things to be placed over top of grocery stores, things like that. But one of the most profound things that he came across when he was doing this research was he found out how much an assisted knowledge in front of him or through this technology was changing his perception of life. So he pioneered early diminished reality. And what he did was he used the glasses to actually replace advertisements in the world with reminders to himself. Like, don't forget to get bread on the way home tonight. Don't forget. So, and again, if you research Stephen Mann online, you can find some amazing photographs from the 80s where he has replaced entire signs through his field of vision so they don't have advertising, they have things for him. Right? The idea of diminished reality was something he thought that became very important as we moved forward in time because your vision can't be trusted in combination with your psychology. The other thing that I really liked about, and by the way, I do a lot of these little hacks from Stephen Mann myself now, but the other thing that I thought was really profound was just he's been so far ahead of the curve that he's a really, really important visionary. A lot of the stuff he writes about and talks about nowadays is, I mean, I don't even understand it. Next one is Neil Haberson. I think he's from Barcelona. I've spoken at a couple events with him, but he had a sensor put in his head. He's colorblind, so he could hear colors, right? So again, this idea of like mixing senses. And when, colors are literally refraction of light. So basically, if you can see colors, you're seeing time because you're seeing light change speed, right? So this is a very interesting way of looking at that. This is my friend Rob Spence from Canada. He was on my TV special with me. He had a camera put into his eye so he could start to record everything and replay his memories, which I think is really interesting. And then finally, we move up to nowadays where people are wearing and inserting all sorts of technology. I bring this up because we're starting to get to a point where we're reshaping time, not around the actual time spent, but the feeling invoked. There's a website that actually where people post their biological responses to different things, and then they compare notes with other people. Like, was your breakup like this? Was getting fired for you like this? And they do everything from respiration to heart rate. A lot of gamers on YouTube now, I don't know if you guys have seen this, but they actually show their heart rate while they're playing the game so that you can actually see, how nerve-wracking it is for people. It really comes down to this idea that I mentioned yesterday during my keynote, and that's we're slowly facing this kind of interface collapse. And I say this because, again, if you become a managed system, how you keep track of time is now merged with your biology, right? So, heartbeats in one lifetime, steps in one day replace an 8-hour day, right? How many of you here count your steps or try to have a certain amount of steps every day? Good amount of you? So right away, if I were to say to you, don't look at your calendar, but give me the last 5 weeks of steps, you can kind of tell me what those days are like, right? If I said, give me your sleep, you could probably tell me what those days are like. So what you're doing is you are actively substituting behavior with time. Behavior with time. And you're one of the few generations that have actually been able to do both. Now, children under 10 will grow up in a world where time is irrelevant and it's just behavior, right? But people between 20 and my age, and maybe a little older, we actually have to deal with, oh my gosh, was that a good day or a bad day, and actually think about the time and the behavior. And I think this is really important because as programmers and developers, once we get to the stage where people like Hannes or Timu or any of the other speakers that have been here today, where they've physically altered their internals, these people actually start to have, they're transhumanists and all sorts of belief systems. I personally am looking very forward to death. I wish I was dead right now, right? But it's just because life is hard, and I think sometimes we just have to say, I'm over it. But as these times and our ability to understand it start to shift, then we start to need to move. Now, I talked a little bit about what I did, but I really didn't go into this very much. But one of the things I did in 2015 as I got more into hacking time was this idea of how do I start to understand my day through the data. Was it the weather and temperature? Was it the music I listened to? Was it the biological response? Was it the food I ate? Was it where I went, who I hung out with, doing something I'd never done before, like riding a horse or just getting active or freezing my, 2011, I was freezing. I was out. I was probably 290 pounds. I was gigantic, but I was freezing and I was doing exercise. But like, how do I start to make sense of all of that? Which led me to being able to start to see my life through behaviors. And I started to map those behaviors to things that were out of my control that influenced them. For instance, I don't sleep well during the full moon. So you can see up there the moon cycle. You've got a new moon all the way to the left. You've got a full moon right in the middle. And you've got a new moon back out here. So interestingly enough, 80% of all women don't sleep well during the full moon. How many of you actually track the moon cycle? I was surprised last time anybody watch the moon? You do, you do, you do. So the moon actually has a really interesting effect on your sleep. Anybody measure their sleep? A lot of you, very good. So anybody measure your sleep and the moon? Yes. What have you found? You have an app. But have you looked at, does the moon affect your sleep? Okay. Well, this is about 10 years worth of information. I use Sleep Cycle, a company out of Gothenburg here. And I mean, this is amazing. So now what I do, knowing that I have a harder time sleeping around a full moon, because our full moon I think is Thursday, I literally start to back up and go to bed earlier before and after the full moon. Also, I change the way I sleep based on what I have to do. If I'm not sleeping very well, I'm having trouble sleeping, I know that cardio is actually going to make me sleep worse than actually strength training, right? So again, if you've got 5 or 6, months or years worth of data, you can start to say, if I want to fix or change my sleep time, you can actually start to say, well, what are the behaviors or what are the weather conditions, right? I sleep like a baby when it snows, but not too well when it rains. And this has really led me to be able to start to look at my life kind of through this, prismatic lens of not just the time during the day, but the behaviors that actually made the quality of those days seem somewhat different. And finally allowed me to merge not only Maslow's hierarchy of needs with the apps I use, but kind of create this congruent system of how I see my life. So moving onward and upward. So we talked yesterday about these temporal platforms. We talked about Kairos. If you guys remember, Kairos was this non-ordered time, indeterminate, theological nature, agrarian subjective bias on or about 1500 it went away. So the Greeks had this idea that there were certain amounts of time that happened in life that just, you felt it. Like every now and then I get the feeling like, oh, this is a good moment, or you just get a bad feeling when you meet someone. Sometimes we use the word energy. Kairos is one of these things that we actually see a lot. Kairos lives only in these types of time. There is no Kairos in just straight temporality. You can sense Kairos in weather. You can sense Kairos in biology, like you'll just start feeling not well. You can sense Kairos in changes in your behavior. You can sense Kairos in changes of your activity. And you can definitely sense Kairos in your location. But you can't sense Kairos in time. Time cancels it out because you start to measure time, right? Oh, okay, this is happening at 5 p.m. every day. It's not Kairos, it's 5 p.m., okay? So I try to help people understand that when you think about time, you think about design and technology, or if you're heavily burdened by time problems right now, probably what's happening is you're spending all your time in time, not in behavior. I'll let that sink in for a minute. You're spending all your time in time, not behavior. Which leads us to the second type of time, which is chronos, right? And chronos is this idea of it's a quantitative ordered minutes of a mechanical system, right? Clocks. Like we didn't have, before clocks, we really didn't have that. We had sundials, things that were more, they were still time-based, but there can be a lot of time between noon and 6 p.m. during the daylight, right? So the other thing was you can do a lot of objective bios with chronos, right? You weren't here at 3 o'clock. This wasn't done on the deadline, right? It's weaponized temporality, right? It's just, and it's everywhere now. People are screenshotting stuff with a time on it. I mean, they're forwarding emails to other people saying, look at this. I mean, it's really, really harsh. We've taken the idea of chronos and made it like the king of all things. People are like, oh, I've got to do all this stuff before I'm 30, or I have to do all this stuff by the time I'm 50. And it's really, really, it's been a hard run with that. Some great examples of people who weaponized chronology, Ben Franklin. Ben Franklin actually created this ridiculous calendar long before we had the likes of Gary Vee, who basically said, I'm going to do these types of things during this type of day. I mean, this is 1700s. Ben Franklin's hacking his schedule. No wonder he had time to build a country, right? If we go forward a little bit, you know, you can say whatever you want about me and the world's most connected man, but what did I do? I made my calendar like my life diary, right? So my calendar became very, very interesting. But my calendar for me, when I finally realized what I was doing, became a behavior stack. Like days that were heavy in blue were days that were behaviors I valued. Days that were heavy in red were behaviors I didn't. Right? So again, it started saying, okay, it's not about the time that I'm spending, it's about what I'm doing in that time. I met a woman back in 2015 who shared this with me. So these were her iPhone alarm screens, and she basically had almost every hour of the entire day mapped out with what to do. And I thought to myself, you've created like turn-by-turn directions for your entire day because you don't want to keep track of time. Yeah, and she'd get the alarm, I'll do this, then do this, do this. Since then, since I met this woman, I've met like so many people who have lots of alarms. How many of you have more than one alarm on your phone? Or maybe, more than 10? Look, a few of you. I mean, it's cool. I mean, just keep a lot of them turned off and turned on. Look, people are like, who are the freaks in the room? You guys are all turned around. Am I near one? Don't get it on me. Keep your time over there. We should be talking about this. We really should. But by 2017, I loved this. I found this guy online. He's a college student, and he literally created a spreadsheet of a semester at school to see how he was spending his time. So he wanted to optimize his girlfriend, is what he said. If college students are doing this, I mean, there's some weird stuff going on in the world, right? So this is a family that I found last year or this year, and they planned their Disney vacation down to the 15-minute mark. You ever see people freaking out about being late? This is Mark Wahlberg about 6 months ago. Right? Can you imagine? And you think you don't have time. Which leads us to this idea that I think we're starting to enter a new age or a new time. We're entering what I call algorithmos. And algorithmos is this concept of we no longer have the non-ordered time that made things feel nice and slow, that was very subjective, that was tied to the seasons and maybe gods or goddesses. We have left this kind of weaponized, ordered linear time. We're at the peak of kind of the angry subtraction or separation from it. And we are entering what I'm calling algorithmos. So algorithmos is really not about ordered or unordered time, but about emergent experiences. And what we're seeing, whether it's individually for ourselves or at a population level, we're seeing emergent experiences. Now, you can call these trends, you can call them going viral, you can call them all sorts of things, but an emergent experience is created by the time of many people and then impacts the time of many people. Does that make sense? And it will start to make sense why your life seems really kind of chaotic and why you seem like you're connected to everyone around you, because everyone around you is creating your time, right? Even when you get away, there's a sense of emergent experiences and things. It's chaotic in nature instead of determinate. It's basically all technology, because technology runs on a system clock, right? I mean, you can't kind of get away from that. Refresh rates on screens, another type of time. Anybody who's into kind of the philosophy of accelerationism, this is kind of what happens when capitalism takes over. The bias becomes systematic, so it's programmatic, and I believe we're deep into this now. Now, the algorithmic time frame that we're in now, I don't think will last more than 10, 15 more years, but then we're going to actually start having some real problems as we try to merge these two things together. So, what are some examples of algorithmic algorithmos? Well, as I mentioned before, you can have trends. And what's really crazy about what we're seeing with trends and algorithmos is you can have two completely separate different trends, one on one platform and one on another. The other thing you can have is this kind of idea of sorting. There's been serious backlash against Twitter and Facebook because they've reordered timelines. You don't see things in time order anymore, right? How many of you are influenced or think about the fact you don't see things in order? A lot of you, right? I mean, and again, Jack Dorsey is actually restoring the timeline in Facebook. I sometimes go to YouTube and just keep refreshing the page to see what it offers me, because it's like this kind of, slot machine for the mind. Who does that? I mean, it's so much fun. Because it's just like, what does the machine think I need now, right? And sometimes I won't click. I'll just hover my mouse over it because I know it's checking. And I'll just go, just to mess with it, because I think it's how time is being reordered for me. Then there's also this idea of algorithmic delay, right? So, you've got people who are basically, getting alerts that there are missiles coming toward them. But you could also have that be confused because you could read something on Twitter from like 3 hours ago about something that's already gone past. I think there's some really interesting things with algorithmic delay. This is a band, I can't remember their name, but 2 years ago they used Facebook Live to actually create a sync beat. So they started recording and then used the delay in the transmission to create another instrument. It was really kind of cool. Someone actually playing with time. And then finally, this idea of error propagation. So again, you could have something shared online, like another example of how errors outrun corrections. So Billy Idol said, looks like it was a really nice day for a white wedding during the Meghan Markle wedding. But then he came back and said, looks like a lovely day in the UK for Harry and Meghan's royal wedding. So the thing that actually was incorrect got more attention than the thing that was incorrect. So we're going to talk a little bit in the next section about creating a time machine, but I think we've got about 3 more minutes left before we break on this one. Is that right? About 3 minutes? So I just want to kind of, and you guys have to help me with time, ironic, right? I just want to kind of end with kind of the analog review of time in some ways that I deal with time now. So again, the evolution or the disruption in time has not done much for the analog clock. There are ways you can start to disrupt your analog clock if you yourself want to start to restore your time. So the first set is something called the season clock. You can still buy this online. I own 2. They're not cheap. They're about $200 US. But this is a clock I keep in my house, and it actually makes a revolution once a year. So the hands actually go around very slowly until it goes all the way back around. It's a wonderful thing to keep on your desk, a wonderful thing to hang on your wall. At first, you think this is kind of weird, but then you start to notice it. And it's funny how when you go from one season to another and you don't notice the hand for an entire season, how much you start being more mindful about that sort of thing. So something as simple as looking for alternative displays and clocks. This is another one called the Today Clock. It only does 1 revolution per day. So if you can't handle waiting a full year to watch the hand move, you can do this. And of course, for those of you who are health fans, you know that Apple, at least in their way of looking at health, has created a kind of day clock for health. If any of you were tied to the movie Lost, you know that the island actually moved both in and around physical space and time. And finally, my last 2 favorite examples of time and time markers that we ignore or don't ignore. This is something called a tsunami stone from 1896. They were all over Japan. And they basically say, hey, be careful. We used to live here, and a tsunami came in and killed everyone. And of course, life got busy, and they moved the tsunami stones, and then they found them and thought, why didn't we pay attention? And then because of, I'm here in Copenhagen, I'll just kind of mention this one. I normally don't. But if you go south of Malmo into Copenhagen, anybody from Copenhagen? This is the world clock. Anybody seen the world clock in Copenhagen? So the world clock does a revolution once every 25,000 years. Right? So what is that? It was like a half-an-hour train ride. Go check it out. It's right in City Hall. This side over here are like the stars and constellations, and you've got like, our solar system, and then days, and it's just ridiculous, right? The amount of precision that had to be created in that. And then Jeff Bezos, I don't know if any of you know this, but he's building a clock inside a mountain in Texas that will dong every 10,000 years. That's rich, right? When you're building an alarm clock for 10,000 years, you don't plan on dying. No, just saying. I'm just calling it out. Of course, you got to love Norway. They've said, you know what? We're running out of food. We're keeping all of it to ourselves. This is the seed bank. And then finally, my favorite thing about Norway is they have something called the Library of the Future, which basically they've planted 100 trees to write 100 books in 2014 that in 2114, they'll harvest these trees, take these unmanuscripted books, print them on the paper from those trees, and then build this library. So they have a very, very long plan on that. Which brings us to the idea of how do we build a time machine, which will be what we start in the next session if you choose to come back, talking about hardware and software. But for that, you'll have to come back if you want to come back. If you don't, that's fine too. And we'll talk about how to start to change your sense of time. We have time for questions, so if you want to ask them, you can ask them. If not, you can go enjoy some coffee and have a good day. But hope you like this. Thank you so much for coming and spending time.